The Three Wishes. Chapter 1. The Mundane Life of Daniel Hayes. The alarm clock blared in the darkness, its shrill, unrelenting tone cutting through the fragile quiet of early morning. Daniel Hayes groaned, his hand groping blindly across the nightstand to silence the noise. After a few seconds of fumbling, he found the snooze button and slammed it down, though the sound still echoed in his head as he lay motionless on the bed. The cracked ceiling stared back at him, its tiny fissures forming patterns he'd memorized over the years. He'd once tried to see pictures in the cracks, like constellations in the night sky, but now they were just lines, meaningless, like the rest of his life. He wasn't sure how long he lay there, the weight of another day pressing down on him. The dim light filtering through the blinds told him it was morning, though nothing about it felt new. Daniel finally swung his legs over the side of the bed, letting his feet touch the cold hardwood floor. The chill jolted him slightly, but it didn't linger. He sat there for a moment, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. A faint smell of stale coffee and damp laundry filled the room, a scent he barely noticed anymore. It was the smell of routine, of neglect, of a life left to stagnate. The bathroom mirror greeted him with its usual cruelty. Daniel stared at his reflection, noting every flaw with the precision of a man who had nothing else to do. His face was pale, his skin tinged with a sickly yellow hue from years spent under artificial office lights. Dark circles hung under his eyes like bruises, a permanent reminder of his restless nights. His brown hair, once thick and full, was now thinning and streaked with gray. He ran a hand through it, sighing as he noticed how much of it came loose in his fingers. 42, he muttered to himself, his voice heavy with resignation. 42, and this is it. He didn't say it with self-pity. He didn't have the energy for that anymore. It was just a fact, simple and undeniable. This was his life. The same job he'd been working for over a decade, the same small apartment that felt more like a cage than a home, and the same empty routine that stretched out endlessly before him. He wasn't even miserable anymore. Misery required passion, some spark of emotion. Daniel had long since burned out. The office was as lifeless as ever, rows of gray cubicles stretched out like tombstones, each one marking the burial site of another person's dreams. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting a cold, sterile glow over everything. Daniel sat at his desk, his fingers hovering over the keyboard as he stared at the spreadsheet on his computer screen. The numbers blurred together the longer he looked at them, forming patterns that made his head spin. He glanced at the clock in the corner of his monitor. 9:47 a.m. Barely an hour into the workday, and he already felt like he'd been there for an eternity. He leaned back in his chair, letting out a long, slow breath. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and cheap air freshener, a combination that made his stomach churn. To his left, the sound of a phone ringing broke the monotony. He glanced over at his coworker, a young man named Greg, who always seemed far too enthusiastic about his job. Greg answered the phone with a chipper, "Good morning," that made Daniel's skin crawl. He turned back to his computer screen, his fingers finally moving to type something, anything, to make it look like he was working. His eyes drifted to the framed photo on his desk, the only decoration in his otherwise barren workspace. It was a picture of him and his younger sister, Sophia, taken years ago at a family barbecue. In the photo, Sophia was beaming, her arm draped around his shoulders, as if she were trying to pull him into her world of light and joy. Daniel, on the other hand, looked awkward and stiff, his smile forced and his posture rigid. He remembered that day vividly, how he'd spent most of it standing on the sidelines, watching Sophia laugh and joke with their cousins, while he nursed a beer in silence. Sophia was the opposite of him in every way. Where Daniel was cautious and reserved, she was bold and adventurous. She'd always been the dreamer, chasing after goals that seemed impossible to everyone else. For years, she'd been trying to make it as a writer, pouring her heart and soul into stories that she believed would change the world. Daniel admired her passion, even if he didn't understand it. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt that kind of drive, that unshakable belief in something bigger than himself. His phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. The screen lit up with Sophia's name, and for a moment he considered letting it go to voicemail. But guilt got the better of him and he swiped to answer. "Hey, Danny," her voice came through the line, bright and cheerful as always. "How's it going?" Daniel glanced around the office, making sure no one was paying attention to him. Not that it mattered. He could probably disappear for hours, and no one would notice. "Same as always," he replied. "Boring. How about you?" "Pretty good. I've been working on a new manuscript," she said, her excitement palpable even over the phone. "It's different from anything I've done before. I really think this one might be it, you know?" Daniel forced a smile, though she couldn't see it. "That's great, Soph. I hope it works out for you." "Thanks, Danny. I know you don't really get the whole writing thing, but it means a lot to me that you still support me." "Of course," he said automatically. But even as the words left his mouth, he felt a pang of doubt. Did he really support her? Or was he just saying what she wanted to hear? He wanted to believe he was on her side, but a small, nagging part of him couldn't help but wonder if she was wasting her time chasing a dream that would never come true. They chatted for a few more minutes before hanging up, and Daniel stared at his phone for a long time after the call ended. He felt a strange mix of emotions: pride for his sister's determination, guilt for his own lack of faith in her, and a deep, unshakable sadness that he couldn't quite explain. The rest of the workday passed in a blur, each hour bleeding into the next until Daniel finally found himself back in his apartment. He dropped his keys on the counter and collapsed onto the couch, staring at the dark TV screen. The silence of the room was oppressive, pressing down on him like a physical weight. He thought about turning on the TV, but even the thought of background noise felt exhausting. His phone buzzed again, and he glanced at the screen. This time it was Nathan. Daniel hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hey," Nathan said, his voice low and tired. "You busy?" "Not really," Daniel replied. "What's up?" Nathan sighed. I don't know, man. I'm just having one of those days, you know." Daniel knew. Nathan had been struggling for years, ever since he'd lost his job and fallen into a deep depression. Daniel had tried to help him, but nothing seemed to make a difference. He felt helpless, watching his best friend sink further and further into despair. "You want to grab a coffee?" Daniel asked. "Talk about it?" "Yeah," Nathan said after a pause. "Yeah, that'd be good." Continued in the next response due to word count constraints. Chapter 1, The Mundane Life of Daniel Hayes continued. The diner was exactly as Daniel remembered it, dimly lit with red vinyl booths that had seen better days and the faint smell of grease hanging in the air. It was the kind of place that seemed to exist outside of time, unchanged and uncaring about the world outside. Daniel pushed open the door and spotted Nathan sitting in their usual booth near the back. He was hunched over, staring into a cup of coffee that looked as though it had been sitting untouched for a while. "Hey, man," Daniel said as he slid into the seat across from him. Nathan looked up, his tired eyes meeting Daniel's. There were dark circles under them, and his face was pale, almost gaunt. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Hey," he said, his voice hollow. "You look like hell," Daniel said, trying to keep his tone light. Nathan let out a dry laugh. "Thanks. Always nice to hear." They sat in silence for a few moments, the din of the diner filling the void between them. The clatter of dishes and the low murmur of conversations created a kind of white noise that Daniel found oddly soothing. A waitress came by and refilled their coffee cups without a word. "So," Daniel said finally, "what's going on?" Nathan shrugged. "Same old shit. Job hunting's a nightmare. I got another rejection email today. I don't even know why I bother anymore." "Something will come through," Daniel said, though he didn't entirely believe it himself. Nathan shook his head. "Yeah, maybe, or maybe I'm just not cut out for this anymore. Maybe I should just give up." "Don't say that," Daniel said, his voice firmer now. "You can't think like that." Nathan stared into his coffee, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the side of the mug. "I don't know, man. It just feels like I'm stuck. You know, like no matter what I do, I can't get out of this hole." Daniel didn't know what to say. He wanted to help, but he didn't have the answers. He didn't even have the answers for his own life, let alone someone else's. All he could do was sit there and listen, hoping that maybe, in some small way, it would be enough. By the time Daniel got home, it was late. The city outside was quiet, the streets bathed in the dim orange glow of the streetlights. He climbed the stairs to his apartment, his legs heavy with exhaustion, and unlocked the door. The familiar scent of his apartment greeted him as he stepped inside. Stale coffee, damp laundry, and something faintly metallic that he couldn't quite place. He dropped his keys on the counter and sank onto the couch, staring at the dark TV screen. The silence of the room was oppressive, pressing down on him like a physical weight. He thought about calling Emily, his ex-wife, but decided against it. They'd been divorced for 3 years, and though she still checked in on him from time to time, their conversations always felt forced. He'd loved her once, but he'd let that love slip away, just like everything else in his life. The phone rang, jolting him out of his thoughts. He frowned and glanced at the screen, expecting to see Sophia or Nathan's name, but the number was unfamiliar. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello? Good evening, Daniel Hayes," a deep, calm voice said on the other end of the line. It wasn't a voice he recognized, and yet it sent a shiver down his spine. "I've been waiting to speak with you." "Who is this?" Daniel asked, his voice edged with suspicion. "You can call me the Genie, Saraying," the voice replied. "I have an offer for you, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." Daniel frowned. "I think you've got the wrong number." "Oh, I assure you, Daniel, this call is meant for you. You've been chosen. 3 wishes, no strings attached. Well, perhaps a few strings, but we'll get to that." Daniel's heart began to race. "This is some kind of joke, right? Who put you up to this?" The Genie chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. "This is no joke. You have 2 days to decide your wishes. Each wish will affect the life of someone you love, Sophia, Nathan, and Emily. But be warned, these wishes will not bring them happiness. Quite the opposite, in fact. The question is, Daniel, how will you wield this power?" Daniel's throat felt dry. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The line went dead before he could speak, leaving him staring at the phone in his hand. The room felt colder now, darker, as if the shadows had crept closer in the silence. 3 wishes, 3 loved ones, and no way out. For the first time in years, Daniel's life felt anything but mundane. It felt like the beginning of a nightmare. Chapter 2, The Weight of the Decision. For the first time in years, Daniel Hayes woke up in a cold sweat. His body was drenched, his heart pounding so violently that he could feel it in his throat. He sat up in bed, gasping for air, his mind replaying the eerie phone call from the night before over and over again. The man's voice, the Genie's voice, was imprinted in his memory, calm yet dripping with an unsettling intrigue. 3 wishes, 3 people he loved, 3 lives that would be ruined, and he had no choice but to participate. The words echoed in his head like a haunting melody, impossible to ignore. He stumbled out of bed, his legs shaky beneath him, and made his way to the bathroom. Splashing cold water on his face did little to calm his nerves. He gripped the edges of the sink, staring into the mirror. It was the same reflection as always. Tired eyes, pale skin, and the faintest hint of stubble shadowing his jawline. But now there was something different. He saw fear there, real and unshakable, pooling in his eyes like ink spreading across a blank canvas. "This can't be real," he whispered to himself, his voice trembling. It was just a prank, some sick joke. But deep down he knew better. There was something about the Genie's voice, the cold certainty of his words, that made it impossible to dismiss. And the way the call had ended, abruptly, as though the man had simply vanished, left Daniel with a gnawing sense of unease. He stumbled back to his bedroom and picked up his phone, scrolling through his call history. The number was there, staring back at him like a glaring red flag, but when he tried to call it back, all he got was a robotic voice telling him the number was no longer in service. His chest tightened in as a wave of panic washed over him. Sophia, the dreamer. By mid-morning, Daniel decided to distract himself by visiting his sister Sophia. She always had a way of grounding him, of pulling him out of his own head with her relentless optimism. If the Genie's twisted game was real, and Daniel had no reason to believe otherwise, then Sophia was one of the 3 people whose life would be upended by his decisions. That thought alone was enough to make his stomach churn. Sophia lived in a small but cozy apartment on the edge of the city. The walls were lined with bookshelves stuffed to capacity, their wooden frames bowing slightly under the weight of countless novels. Manuscripts and notebooks were scattered across every available surface, evidence of her tireless dedication to her craft. The air smelled faintly of lavender and ink, a combination that Daniel had come to associate with his sister. Danny! Sophia greeted him with her usual enthusiasm, pulling him into a tight hug as soon as he walked through the door. What are you doing here? Not that I'm complaining, of course. I just felt like stopping by, Daniel said, his voice unconvincing even to himself. Sophia narrowed her eyes at him, her smile faltering slightly. You okay? You look like you haven't slept. Daniel forced a laugh, waving her concern away. I'm fine, just a long night, that's all. Sophia didn't look convinced, but she didn't press him further. Instead, she led him to the couch and handed him a cup of tea. So what's up? How's work? Same as always, Daniel said, taking a sip of the tea, even though he could barely taste it. Boring, repetitive, you know how it is. Sophia rolled her eyes. Danny, you've been saying the same thing for years. Maybe it's time for a change. Maybe, he muttered. He couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth, that he was here because of her, because of a choice he would have to make that could shatter her life. Instead, he changed the subject. How's the writing going? Sophia's face lit up, and for a moment Daniel felt a pang of guilt for even considering her as part of the Genie's game. She launched into a passionate explanation of her latest project, her hands moving animatedly as she described the plot and characters. Daniel tried to focus, but his mind kept drifting to the possibilities of what could happen to her. What kind of wish would the Genie twist to ruin her life? Would it crush her spirit, take away her creativity, or strip her of her dreams entirely? Danny, Sophia's voice pulled him back to the present. Sorry, he said, shaking his head. I was just thinking. Sophia studied him for a moment, her expression softening. You've been doing that a lot lately, thinking. I mean, is something wrong? Daniel hesitated, the words hanging on the tip of his tongue, but he couldn't bring himself to say them. Instead, he forced a smile and shook his head. No, nothing's wrong. I'm just tired, that's all. Nathan, the loyal friend. Later that afternoon, Daniel met Nathan at their usual spot, a rundown basketball court in their old neighborhood. The chain-link fence surrounding the court was rusted and bent in places, and the asphalt was cracked and uneven, but it was their place. They'd been coming here since they were kids, shooting hoops and talking about everything and nothing. Nathan was already there when Daniel arrived, dribbling a worn-out basketball with a slow, deliberate rhythm. He looked up as Daniel approached, his face lighting up with a tired but genuine smile. Hey, man, Nathan said, tossing the ball to Daniel. Thought you'd be too busy to hang out. Busy doing what? Daniel replied, catching the ball. You know my life isn't exactly exciting. Nathan laughed, a sound that was more hollow than joyful. Yeah, I guess we're both stuck in the same boat, huh? They played for a while, falling into a familiar rhythm that didn't require much thought. The sound of the ball hitting the pavement echoed in the empty court, filling the silence between them. Eventually, they sat down on the bench, the ball rolling to a stop near their feet. How's the job hunt going? Daniel asked, though he already knew the answer. Nathan shrugged, staring down at his hands. Same as always. A whole lot of nothing. I'm starting to think I'm just not cut out for anything, you know? Don't say that, Daniel said, his tone firmer than he intended. You're one of the smartest people I know. Something will come through. Nathan let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, maybe. Or maybe I'm just destined to be a screw-up. Daniel wanted to say something to comfort him, but the words caught in his throat. The truth was, he wasn't sure he believed his own reassurances. And now, with the Genie's game hanging over his head, the thought of Nathan's life being ruined because of him was almost too much to bear. Emily, the ghost of the past. By evening, Daniel found himself staring at his phone, Emily's name highlighted on the screen. He hadn't spoken to her in weeks, but something about the Genie's words made him feel like he needed to hear her voice. After a moment's hesitation, he hit the call button. Hello? Emily's voice came through the line, soft and familiar. Hey, Daniel said, his voice cracking slightly. It's me. There was a pause before she replied. Hi, Daniel. It's been a while. Yeah, he admitted. I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing. Emily sighed, and Daniel could picture her running a hand through her hair the way she always did when she was nervous. I'm okay. You? Same old, he said, the words feeling hollow. Work, sleep, repeat. They talked for a while, their conversation filled with the kind of small talk that felt both comforting and distant. Emily told him about her new mom, her plans for the weekend, and a book she'd been reading. Daniel listened, savoring the sound of her voice even as guilt gnawed at him. He wanted to tell her everything. The genie, the wishes, the impossible decisions he was being forced to make. But he couldn't. How could he? How could he explain something so insane? Something that sounded like it belonged in a bad horror movie. Daniel? Emily's voice pulled him out of his thoughts. Yeah? You sound different Is everything okay? He hesitated, his grip tightening on the phone. Yeah, none, he said finally. I'm fine. The clock is ticking. By the time Daniel hung up with Emily, the weight of the genie's ultimatum was crushing him. He sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, his mind racing. He had less than 2 days to decide. 3 wishes, 3 loved ones, 3 lives shattered. And the worst part was, he couldn't see a way out. The phone buzzed on the coffee table, and Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He picked it up, half expecting to see the genie's number again, but it was just a text from Sophia. Love you, Danny. Don't forget that. Daniel stared at the message, his chest tightening. The clock was ticking, and no matter what he did, someone he loved was going to suffer, and it was all on him. Chapter 3, The First Wish. The next morning dawned heavy with an unnatural stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Daniel Hayes felt that weight in the pit of his stomach as he sat on the edge of his bed, staring blankly at the floor. The air in the apartment was suffocating, the silence ringing in his ears louder than any noise could. He hadn't slept, not really. He'd spent the night pacing the small space, replaying the genie's words over and over in his head. 2 days to decide, 3 wishes, 3 lives ruined, no way out. The clock on his nightstand ticked softly, a metronome counting down the seconds until his first decision would be due. The genie hadn't called again, but Daniel could feel a presence lingering, as if the man, or whatever he was watching, waiting for him to act. The weight of the decision was unbearable. Each of the 3 people the genie had named, Sophia, Nathan, and Emily, meant something irreplaceable to him. They were the only connections he had left in a life that had otherwise eroded into isolation. And yet, no matter what he did, he would hurt them. His choices would shatter their lives in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The only thing he knew for certain was that there was no escaping this nightmare. The burden of choice. By mid-morning, Daniel found himself sitting at his kitchen table, staring at a notebook. He had scribbled the names Sophia, Nathan, Emily across the top of the page, followed by a series of half-formed ideas and hastily crossed-out notes beneath each one. He was trying to make sense of the impossible, to rationalize the irrational, but the more he thought about it, the more hopeless it all seemed. For Sophia, he had written, "Stop chasing her dreams. Focus on something practical." The words felt like poison in his mind, but he couldn't deny that part of him believed it. Her writing career had been a constant uphill battle that left her drained and discouraged more often than not. He wanted to protect her from the pain of failure, to give her a chance at a stable, predictable life. But what would that mean for her? Would it strip her of the very thing that made her who she was? For Nathan, the notes were even messier. No more financial struggles. A fresh start. Nathan had been struggling for years, barely scraping by and sinking deeper into depression with every passing day. Daniel wanted to help him, to give him the kind of stability he desperately needed, but he knew the genie wouldn't make it that simple. Whatever wish he made, it would come with a price, one that Nathan might not be able to pay. And then there was Emily. Daniel had barely been able to bring himself to write her name, let alone anything else. The thought of hurting her, of taking away the happiness she had worked so hard to rebuild after their divorce, was unbearable. But the genie had made it clear. He couldn't avoid making a decision. If he didn't choose, the genie would choose for him, and Daniel couldn't imagine what kind of twisted fate the genie might have in store. His phone buzzed on the table, jolting him out of his thoughts. He picked it up hesitantly, half expecting to see the genie's number again, but it was just a text from Sophia. "Hey, Danny, thinking about you. Let's grab dinner soon, okay? Love you." Daniel stared at the message, the knot in his stomach tightening. He couldn't put this off any longer. The genie's deadline was looming, and every second he delayed felt like a step closer to disaster. The genie returns that evening as the sun dipped below the horizon and the city outside his window was bathed in shadows. Daniel's phone rang. The sound made him jump, his heart pounding in his chest as he fumbled to pick it up. The screen displayed the same unknown number as before, and for a moment he considered letting it ring. But he knew better. There was no avoiding this. "Hello?" he said, his voice trembling. "Good evening, Daniel," the genie's smooth, unsettling voice replied. "I trust you've been giving my offer some thought." Daniel swallowed hard. "I need more time." The genie chuckled softly, the sound sending a chill down Daniel's spine. "Time is a luxury you don't have, my friend. You've had nearly 2 days to consider your options, and now the moment of truth is upon us. It's time to make your first wish." Daniel's throat felt dry, his palms slick with sweat. I, I don't even know what to wish for. How am I supposed to choose?" "That's the beauty of it," the genie said, his tone dripping with mock sympathy. "There is no right choice, only the choice you're willing to live with." Daniel closed his eyes, his mind racing. He thought about Sophia, her bright smile and unwavering determination. He thought about Nathan, his quiet resilience in the face of endless hardship. And he thought about Emily, the love they had shared and lost. Every instinct in him screamed to protect them, to shield them from the pain he knew was coming. But he couldn't protect all of them. He couldn't protect any of them. He hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wish Sophia would stop chasing her dreams of becoming a writer and focus on something practical." The words felt like a dagger in his chest, but once they were spoken, there was no taking them back. The consequences of the first wish. The genie's laughter filled the silence, low and menacing. "Ah, an interesting choice. Very well, Daniel. Your first wish has been granted. Now let's see how it unfolds." The line went dead and Daniel was left staring at his phone, his heart pounding in his chest. For a moment, nothing happened. The apartment was still, silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. But then, his phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Sophia. "Hey, Danny, just wanted to let you know I've decided to take a break from writing. It's just not working out right now. Love you." Daniel's stomach dropped. The words felt like a punch to the gut, and he could almost hear the forced cheerfulness in her tone. He called her immediately, his fingers shaking as he dialed her number. "Hey, Danny," Sophia answered, her voice bright but hollow. "What's up?" "What do you mean you're taking a break from writing?" Daniel blurted out. "Since when?" Sophia hesitated, and for a moment he thought she might break down and tell him the truth. But instead, she laughed softly. "I don't know. I just realized it's not really going anywhere, you know? Maybe it's time to focus on something more practical." The words hit Daniel like a sledgehammer. This wasn't Sophia. She would never give up on her dreams, not willingly. The genie's twisted magic had taken something fundamental from her, something that made her who she was. "But you love writing," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "It's who you are." "Yeah, well," Sophia said, her tone dismissive, "maybe it's time to figure out who else I can be." They talked for a few more minutes, but Sophia was distant, her usual warmth and enthusiasm replaced by a cold detachment that made Daniel's chest ache. When the call ended, he sat in silence, staring at the phone in his hand. He had thought he was protecting her, but instead, he had destroyed the very thing that made her unique. The guilt sets in the next few days were a blur. Daniel went through the motions of his daily routine, but his mind was consumed by guilt and regret. He couldn't stop thinking about Sophia, about the light that had gone out in her voice. He had thought he was doing the right thing, but now he realized how wrong he had been. And the worst part was, he knew this was only the beginning. The genie hadn't called again, but Daniel could feel his presence lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next move. The weight of the remaining two wishes pressed down on him like a vice, and he knew that no matter what he chose, the outcome would be devastating. Cliffhanger ending. As Daniel sat alone in his apartment, staring at the cracked ceiling, his phone buzzed. The screen lit up with an unknown number, and his heart sank. He knew who it was. "Good evening, Daniel," the genie's voice purred. "Are you ready for round two?" Daniel's hands trembled as he gripped the phone, his mind racing. He wasn't ready. He would never be ready. But the game was far from over. Chapter 4, The Second Wish. The days that had passed since Daniel made his first wish felt like a slow descent into madness. The weight of what he had done to Sophia bore down on him, suffocating and inescapable. Every time he thought about her, the image of her once bright smile came to mind, now replaced with the hollow, detached voice he had heard on the phone. It was as if the part of her that made her who she was, the fire, the dreamer, had been snuffed out, leaving behind only a shell. And it was his fault. Daniel couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. He spent hours sitting on his couch, staring at the phone, waiting for the inevitable moment when it would ring again. The genie had warned him this would happen, that the first wish was only the beginning. And now, as the hours dragged on, Daniel felt the walls closing in, the crushing weight of the remaining two wishes pressing down on him like lead. When the call finally came, Daniel nearly dropped the phone in his panic. The screen lit up with the same unknown number, and his hands trembled as he answered. "Good evening, Daniel," the genie's smooth, mocking voice greeted him. "I trust you have had some time to reflect on your first choice." Daniel's throat was dry. He swallowed hard, trying to find his voice. You, you ruined her," he said, his voice shaking with anger and guilt. "You turned my sister into someone she's not." The genie chuckled softly, the sound sending a chill down Daniel's spine. "Ruined? No, no, Daniel. I merely granted your wish. You wanted her to focus on something practical, to stop chasing her dreams, and I delivered. If you don't like the outcome, perhaps you should reconsider the kind of wishes you're making." "I didn't mean for it to be like this," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "I just wanted to protect her." "And yet here we are," the genie said, his tone dripping with mock sympathy. "But don't worry, Daniel, you still have two wishes left. Plenty of time to redeem yourself or dig the hole even deeper. Now shall we move on to your second wish?" Daniel's stomach churned. He wasn't ready for this, not again. But he knew there was no point in arguing. The genie wouldn't give him a choice. Nathan's struggles. Daniel spent the next day trying to distract himself, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Nathan. His oldest and closest friend had been through so much in recent years, losing his dream, falling into a deep depression, struggling to make ends meet. Nathan had always been there for Daniel through every low point in his life, and now Daniel felt like he was failing him. He wanted to do something, anything, to help, but he knew the genie's game wasn't about help. It was about destruction. That evening, Daniel met Nathan at the same rundown basketball court where they had spent so many afternoons as kids. The chain-link fence rattled in the breeze, and the faded lines on the asphalt were barely visible under years of wear and tear. Nathan was already there, sitting on the bench with his head down, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "Hey," Daniel said as he approached, his voice tentative. Nathan looked up, forcing a weak smile. "Hey, man. Thanks for coming." They sat in silence for a while, the sound of distant traffic filling the void between them. Daniel could see the exhaustion in Nathan's face, the way his shoulders slumped, as if the weight of the world was pressing down on him. It was a look Daniel had seen countless times before, but it never got any easier. "How's the job search going?" Daniel asked, though he already knew the answer. Nathan let out a bitter laugh. "Same as always. A whole lot of nothing. I don't know why I even bother anymore." "Don't say that," Daniel said, his voice firmer than he intended. "Something will come through. It has to." Nathan shook his head, his gaze fixed on the cracked pavement beneath his feet. "I'm just so tired, man. Tired of trying, tired of failing. Sometimes I think it would be easier to just stop." Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to say something, to offer words of encouragement or reassurance, but the genie's words were still fresh in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that no matter what he did, Nathan's life was about to take a turn for the worse, and it would be his fault. The second wish, the phone call, came later that night, just as Daniel had known it would. He had barely walked through the door of his apartment when the phone buzzed in his pocket, the familiar unknown number lighting up the screen. His hands shook as he answered. "Good evening, Daniel," the genie said, his voice as smooth and unsettling as ever. "I trust you are ready to make your second wish." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He thought about Nathan, about the broken man he had seen at the basketball court earlier that day. Nathan deserved better, better than the life he was living, better than the endless cycle of disappointment and despair. But Daniel knew that whatever wish he made, the genie would twist it into something unrecognizable, something destructive. I, Daniel hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. I wish Nathan could finally be free of his financial struggles and live a comfortable life. The words felt heavy as they left his mouth, and Daniel immediately regretted them. But it was too late. The genie laughed, low and menacing, and Daniel knew there was no turning back. Ah, an interesting choice, the genie said. Very well, Daniel. Your wish is granted. The fall out. The next morning, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. You won't believe this, man. I won the lottery, like a ridiculous amount of money. I don't even know what to do. Daniel stared at the message, his stomach churning. On the surface, it seemed like good news. Great news, even. But he knew better. The genie's wishes always came with a cost. He called Nathan immediately, his hands trembling as he held the phone to his ear. Nathan answered on the first ring, his voice buzzing with excitement. Danny, you're not gonna believe it, Nathan said. I checked my ticket this morning, and I hit the jackpot. We're talking millions, man, millions. That's incredible, Daniel said, forcing enthusiasm into his voice. What are you going to do with it? I don't even know, Nathan admitted, laughing nervously. Pay off my debts, I guess. Maybe buy a house. Hell, maybe I'll just retire and live the dream. But as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that Nathan's newfound wealth wasn't the blessing it seemed to be. At first, everything seemed perfect. He paid off his loans, bought a beautiful house, and started living the kind of life he had always dreamed of. But it didn't take long for the cracks to show. Nathan became paranoid, convinced that everyone around him was only interested in his money. Friends and family who had once supported him now seemed like opportunists, their kindness tainted by the scent of greed. Nathan started pushing people away, isolating himself in his sprawling new home. And then the gambling started. At first, it was just a way to pass the time, a harmless distraction. But it quickly spiraled out of control. Nathan began losing more money than he was comfortable admitting, and the stress of it all started to take a toll on his mental health. The depression that had plagued him for years returned with a vengeance, and this time, it was accompanied by a crushing sense of emptiness. Daniel tried to reach out, but Nathan wouldn't answer his calls. The few times they did speak, Nathan was distant, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. It was as if the money had taken everything good in his life and twisted it into something unrecognizable. The second twist of the knife. One night, Daniel drove to Nathan's house unannounced, desperate to see his friend and make sure he was okay. The house was massive, with a perfectly manicured lawn and a driveway lined with expensive cars, but it felt cold and empty. Daniel knocked on the door, his heart pounding in his chest. When Nathan finally answered, he looked like a ghost of himself. His once bright eyes were dull and bloodshot, and his clothes hung loosely on his frame. He barely acknowledged Daniel as he stepped aside to let him in. The inside of the house was just as lifeless as the outside. It was beautifully furnished, but it felt sterile, like something out of a catalog. Nathan led Daniel to the living room, where an empty bottle of whiskey sat on the coffee table next to a pile of crumpled betting slips. What happened to you? Daniel asked, his voice filled with concern. Nathan shrugged, sinking into the couch. Money changes everything, man. People, relationships. You think it's going to fix everything, but it just makes it worse. Daniel sat down beside him, guilt clawing at his chest. He wanted to tell Nathan the truth, that this was his fault, that he had made the wish that had ruined his life, but he couldn't. The words caught in his throat, and all he could do was sit there in silence as Nathan poured himself another drink. When Daniel left Nathan's house that night, he felt the full weight of what he had done. The genie's game was far from over, and he knew the worst was yet to come. As he drove home, his phone buzzed again. The unknown number lit up the screen, and Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Good evening, Daniel, the genie's voice purred through the speaker. 2 down, 1 to go. Daniel's heart sank. He wasn't sure how much more he could take. Chapter 5, The First Twist. Daniel Hayes had reached his breaking point. The decisions he had made, the wishes he had granted, were eating away at him like a cancer. The guilt over Sophia's hollowed-out existence and Nathan's spiral into paranoia and addiction had left him raw, exposed. He was no longer the man he had once been, apathetic and numb to his own life. Now, every moment was a waking nightmare. Every second a reminder of the destruction he had unleashed on those he loved most. And yet, the worst was still to come. The genie had made that clear. Daniel sat in his darkened living room, the only light coming from the faint glow of the city outside his window. The phone lay on the coffee table in front of him, its presence suffocating. He stared at it, willing it not to ring, but deep down he knew it was only a matter of time before the genie called again. The game wasn't over. There was one wish left, one life left to ruin. His thoughts drifted to Emily. He hadn't spoken to her since the night he called to check in. And now he regretted not saying more, not hearing her voice one last time before everything fell apart. She had always been the best of them, the one who could find beauty in the ugliest of situations, the one who had always believed in him even when he couldn't believe in himself. And now she was next. The idea of hurting her, of taking away the happiness she had worked so hard to rebuild, made him sick. He couldn't do it. He couldn't make the choice. But he didn't have to, not yet. He still had time, or so he thought. The call that changed everything. The phone rang, its shrill tone piercing the silence like a knife. Daniel's heart leapt into his throat, his hands trembling as he reached for it. He didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. "Hello," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Good evening, Daniel," the genie replied, his tone smooth and conversational, as though they were old friends catching up. "You've been avoiding me." Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. "I'm not ready." The genie chuckled, the sound low and menacing. "Ah, but time waits for no one, my friend. You've had your chance to prepare. Now it's time to face the inevitable." "Why are you doing this?" Daniel demanded, his voice cracking. "What's the point of all this? What do you get out of it?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Daniel thought the genie might actually answer him. But when the voice returned, it was colder, more distant than before. "You asked the wrong questions, Daniel," the genie said. "This isn't about me, it's about you. It's always been about you." The words sent a chill down Daniel's spine. "What does that mean?" "You'll find out soon enough," the genie replied. "But for now, let's play a little game, shall we? I'll give you a choice, two paths to take for your final wish. The decision is yours, as it always has been." Daniel's pulse quickened. "What kind of choice?" The genie's voice took on a sinister edge. "Option 1. You can wish for Emily to find peace and happiness, free from the pain of your shared past. Option 2. You can wish for her to remember everything, the love, the loss, the heartbreak, and carry it with her for the rest of her life. Either way, she will never look at you the same again." Daniel's mind reeled. Both options were cruel, devastating in their own way. How could he choose between them? How could he decide what kind of pain Emily would have to endure? "I can't do this," he said, his voice trembling. "I can't make that choice." The genie's laughter echoed through the line, cold and mocking. "Oh, but you must. That's the beauty of the game, Daniel. There is no escape, only the consequences of your actions." A shocking revelation. The line went dead, leaving Daniel staring at the phone in disbelief. For a long moment he sat there in silence, his mind racing. And then, something clicked. The genie's words, "This isn't about me, it's about you," echoed in his head, and a thought began to form, faint and fragile like a flicker of light in the darkness. What if the genie wasn't some supernatural entity? What if this wasn't magic at all, but something else entirely? Desperate for answers, Daniel began digging through his past, searching for anything that might explain what was happening to him. He pulled out old photo albums, letters, and journals, piecing together fragments of his life in the hopes of finding a clue. The process was slow and painstaking, but eventually he found something, a name, Victor Hayes. It was his father's name, scrawled in the margins of an old notebook that Daniel hadn't touched in years. Next to the name was a phone number, long since disconnected, and a series of cryptic notes that made little sense. But one phrase stood out, written in bold letters across the top of the page. "The game is never over." Daniel's heart raced as he stared at the words. His father had died when he was a teenager, a car accident that had left Daniel and Sophia orphaned. But now, for the first time, Daniel began to wonder if there was more to the story. Had his father been involved in something dark, something dangerous? The connection. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Daniel began researching his father's past. What he found only deepened the mystery. Victor Hayes had been a brilliant man, a psychologist who specialized in experimental therapies. But he had also been controversial, known for pushing ethical boundaries and conducting experiments that many considered inhumane. There were whispers of a secret project, something called the Genie protocol, but no concrete evidence to explain what it was. Daniel's mind raced as he pieced the puzzle together. Could the Genie be connected to his father's work? Was this some kind of sick experiment designed to test the limits of human morality? And if so, why had he been chosen? Why now? The answers remained elusive, but one thing was clear. This wasn't random. The Genie's game wasn't just about wishes or consequences. It was personal. Emily's pain. Consumed by his search for the truth, Daniel lost track of time. Days blurred together, and the weight of his final decision pressed down on him like a physical burden. He couldn't stop thinking about Emily, about the life they had shared and the pain he had caused her. She had moved on. She had to. But he hadn't. And now the thought of hurting her again was unbearable. Late one night, Daniel found himself driving to Emily's apartment. He didn't know what he was going to say or do, only that he needed to see her, to explain everything before it was too late. When she opened the door, her expression shifted from surprise to concern. "Daniel," she said softly, "what are you doing here?" I, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice shaking. "It's important." She let him in, and they sat together on the couch, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Daniel tried to explain what was happening, but the words came out jumbled and incoherent. Emily listened patiently, her brows furrowed in confusion. But when he finally finished, she shook her head. "Daniel, this doesn't make any sense," she said. "Oh, are you okay? Have you been sleeping?" "I know it sounds crazy," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "But it's real, Emily. The Genie, the wishes, it's all real. And now I have to make a choice, and I don't know what to do." Emily reached out, her hand resting on his. "Daniel, you're scaring me." The moment was interrupted by the sound of Daniel's phone buzzing. He pulled it from his pocket, his heart sinking as he saw the unknown number flashing on the screen. "Don't answer it," Emily said, her voice trembling. But Daniel knew he had no choice. He answered the call, his hands shaking. "What do you want?" he demanded. The Genie's voice was calm, almost amused. "It's time, Daniel. Make your final wish." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He looked at Emily, her eyes wide with fear and confusion, and he knew there was no way to explain what was about to happen. "I wish," he began, his voice breaking. But before he could finish, the Genie interrupted. "Careful, Daniel," he said, his tone mocking. "The choice you make now will define you forever." Daniel's world spun as he realized the truth. This wasn't just about Emily. This was about him, about who he was, about the kind of man he had become. And as the weight of that realization crashed down on him, he made his decision. Chapter 6, The Final Wish. The silence in Emily's apartment felt heavier than the air in a storm about to break. Daniel Hayes sat on her couch, his phone pressed tightly to his ear, his knuckles white as he gripped the device. Every fiber of his being screamed that he should end the call, that he should throw his phone against the wall and walk away. But he couldn't. The Genie's voice on the other end of the line was calm, patient, as though savoring Daniel's torment. "Go on," the Genie said smoothly. "I'm waiting, Daniel. It's time for your final wish." Daniel's heart raced. His breath came in shallow gasps, and his eyes darted to Emily, who sat across from him, her arms wrapped around herself protectively. She looked at him with concern and fear, her brow furrowed as though she was trying to piece together the fragments of his unraveling story. She didn't believe him. How could she? How could anyone believe the nightmare that had become his reality? "Daniel," Emily said softly, her voice trembling. "Whatever's going on, you can tell me. We'll figure it out together." Her words were like a dagger to his chest. Together, the very thing he had lost with her, the very thing he had destroyed. And now he had to make a choice, one that would ensure they could never be together again. He closed his eyes, his mind racing. The genie had given him two options, both cruel and devastating in their own ways. He could wish for Emily to find peace and happiness, free from the pain of their shared past. But that would mean erasing every memory she had of him, every moment they had spent together. Or he could wish for her to remember everything, the love, the heartbreak, the loss, and carry that pain with her for the rest of her life. Neither choice felt right. Neither choice felt fair. But one thing was clear. There was no escaping this. The genie had made sure of that. The weight of the past. Tick-tock, Daniel. The genie's voice purred through the phone. You don't want to keep me waiting. Or would you rather I make the decision for you? No, Daniel said quickly, his voice breaking. I'll do it. Just give me a moment. The genie chuckled, the sound low and mocking. As you wish. Daniel lowered the phone from his ear and stared at it for a long moment, his hands trembling. Emily was watching him, her eyes wide with worry. He could see the questions swirling in her mind, the unspoken fear that he had finally lost his grip on reality. Emily, he said, his voice hoarse, I need you to know. I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you. She frowned, confusion etched across her face. Daniel, what are you talking about? Hurt me how? He hesitated, his chest tightening as he searched for the right words. But there were no right words. How could he explain the truth? That a mysterious figure had forced him into a twisted game, that he had already destroyed two other lives, and now it was her turn. How could he make her understand the impossible choice he was about to make? I need you to trust me, he said finally. No matter what happens, I need you to remember that I care about you, that I always have. Emily's expression softened, but the fear in her eyes remained. I do trust you, Daniel, but you're scaring me. Please, just tell me what's going on. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry. He couldn't tell her. Not now. It would only make things worse. Instead, he raised the phone to his ear and took a deep, shuddering breath. I've made my decision, he said. Ah, finally, the genie replied, his voice laced with amusement. Do go on. Daniel's hand tightened around the phone as tears welled in his eyes. He glanced at Emily one last time, memorizing the way she looked in that moment, the crease of her brow, the faint glimmer of hope in her gaze. And then, he spoke the words that would change everything. I wish Emily could find peace and happiness, even if it means forgetting about me. The wish granted. The genie's laughter echoed through the line, cold and triumphant. An admirable choice, Daniel. Selfless even. But as you've learned by now, nothing comes without a price. The line went dead, and Daniel lowered the phone, his hands shaking. For a brief moment, the room was silent, the air heavy with anticipation. And then Emily's expression changed. She blinked, her brow furrowing as though she were trying to remember something just out of reach. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on Daniel with a flicker of confusion. Who are you? She asked, her voice uncertain. Daniel's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Emily, it's me. It's Daniel. She shook her head, her eyes narrowing. I don't know you. How did you get in here? The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had known this would happen. He had wished for it. But hearing her say it was more painful than he could have imagined. She didn't remember him. Not their first date, not their wedding, not the nights they had spent talking until dawn. It was all gone, erased as if it had never happened. Emily, please, Daniel said, his voice breaking. It's me. We used to be married. Don't you remember? Her expression hardened, fear replacing confusion. I think you should leave, she said, her voice trembling. Now. Daniel opened his mouth to protest, but the words wouldn't come. He could see the fear in her eyes, the way her body tensed as though she were preparing to run. He had done this to her. He had taken everything they had shared and turned it into nothing more than a blank space in her mind. Without another word, he stood and walked to the door. He paused for a moment, his hand on the doorknob, and looked back at her. She was staring at him, her arms crossed defensively, her eyes cold and unfamiliar. I'm sorry, he whispered, though he knew she couldn't understand. And then he left. The aftermath, the walk back to his apartment, felt like a death march. The city around him was alive with noise and movement, but Daniel felt like a ghost, drifting through the chaos without purpose. He had made his choice, he had played the genie's game, and now he was utterly alone. When he reached his apartment, he sank onto the couch and buried his face in his hands. The weight of everything he had done, Sophia's broken spirit, Nathan's self-destruction, Emily's erased memories, crashed down on him like a tidal wave. He had thought he could protect them, that he could make the best of an impossible situation. But he had been wrong. He had destroyed them. He had destroyed himself. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, and he stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. The screen displayed the same unknown number as before, and his chest tightened. He didn't want to answer, but he knew he had no choice. "Congratulations, Daniel," the genie said when he answered. "You've completed the game." "Why?" Daniel asked, his voice hollow. "Why did you do this to me? What was the point?" The genie chuckled softly. "Oh, Daniel, you still don't understand, do you? This was never about them. It was about you. It was always about you." "What are you talking about?" Daniel demanded, his voice rising. "What do you mean it was about me?" "Let's just say," the genie replied, his tone dripping with amusement, "that you've proven to be a very interesting subject. And now our time together has come to an end. Goodbye, Daniel." The line went dead, and Daniel was left staring at the phone, his mind racing. He didn't know what the genie meant, and he wasn't sure he wanted to. All he knew was that his life, his world, would never be the same again. Chapter 7, The Second Twist. Daniel Hayes sat in the suffocating silence of his apartment, staring at the darkened phone screen on the table in front of him. The genie's voice still echoed in his mind, taunting, mocking, and full of cryptic intent. "This was never about them. It was about you." The words burrowed into his thoughts like a parasite, feeding off his confusion and despair. He had done everything the genie had asked. He had made the choices, played the game, and shattered the lives of the people he loved most. Sophia, Nathan, and Emily. He had ruined them all. And for what? What was the purpose of this cruel experiment? Why had the genie chosen him? The questions circled in his mind, unrelenting, as if the answers were just out of reach, hidden in the shadows of his past. But perhaps they weren't out of reach. Not entirely. Something about the genie's final words, "You've proven to be a very interesting subject," made Daniel think back to the discovery he had made in Chapter 5, Victor Hayes, his father, and the cryptic notes about the Genie protocol. The pieces didn't quite fit yet, but Daniel had the sinking feeling that this nightmare was connected to his father's mysterious past. And if there was even a chance that finding out the truth about Victor Hayes could give Daniel a way to fight back, he had to take it. The search for answers. The first place Daniel looked was his father's old study. Victor Hayes had been an enigmatic man in life, brilliant but distant, always preoccupied with his work. After his death, Daniel had packed up most of his father's belongings, but some of the more personal items, journals, notebooks, and the like, had been boxed up and stored in the attic, untouched for years. It took hours to sort through the dusty boxes, but eventually, Daniel found what he was looking for: a leather-bound journal with Victor's initials engraved on the cover. The pages were filled with dense, handwritten notes, diagrams, and cryptic phrases that made little sense to Daniel at first glance. But as he read, a chilling picture began to take shape. Victor Hayes had been part of a secretive research group in the 1980s, a team of psychologists and neuroscientists working on experimental therapies for trauma and mental illness. The project, codenamed the Genie Protocol, was designed to test the limits of human resilience by forcing subjects to make morally and emotionally devastating decisions. The theory was that by confronting their deepest fears and regrets, the subjects could achieve a kind of psychological cleansing, a rebirth of sorts. But the experiments went too far. Victor's notes described horrific scenarios in which subjects were pushed to the brink of madness, their lives torn apart by the choices they were forced to make. Many of them didn't survive the process. Those who did were left irreparably damaged, their minds fractured by the trauma. The project was eventually shut down after a whistleblower exposed the unethical nature of the experiments. But according to Victor's journal, the research didn't stop. A small group of scientists, including Victor himself, continued the work in secret. refining their methods and developing new ways to manipulate their subjects. They called themselves the architects, and their experiments became more sophisticated and more sadistic with each passing year. Daniel's hands trembled as he read the final entry in the journal, written just days before Victor's death. The game must continue. Only through destruction can we find the truth. A horrifying realization. Daniel sat back, the journal slipping from his hands. His heart was pounding, his breath shallow and uneven. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was more horrifying than anything he could have imagined. The genie wasn't some supernatural being. He was part of the architects, carrying on the work that Victor Hayes and his colleagues had started decades ago. The wishes, the choices, the destruction. It was all part of an elaborate psychological experiment designed to push Daniel to his breaking point. And the most horrifying part? Daniel wasn't just a random victim. He had been chosen because of his connection to Victor, because of his father's legacy. This wasn't a game. It was a test. And Daniel was the subject. The return of the genie. As the weight of this revelation settled over him, Daniel's phone buzzed on the table. He stared at it, his chest tightening as the familiar unknown number appeared on the screen. For a moment, he considered ignoring it, letting it ring until it stopped. But he knew that wouldn't accomplish anything. The genie wouldn't let him escape, not now. With a deep breath, Daniel picked up the phone and answered. "Hello, Daniel," the genie said, his tone as smooth and unsettling as ever. "I see you've been doing some digging." "You knew," Daniel said, his voice shaking with anger. "You knew who I was. You knew about my father." "Of course I knew," the genie replied, sounding almost amused. "Why do you think you were chosen? This isn't random, Daniel. It never was." Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. "Why me? Why now? What do you want from me?" "What I want," the genie said, his voice growing colder, "is to see how far you're willing to go, to see what kind of man you really are when everything you love is stripped away. You see, Daniel, your father believed that true growth could only come from destruction. He believed that the only way to rebuild was to first tear everything down. And you, my friend, are his final experiment." Daniel's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "You've been playing his game all along," the genie said. "You just didn't realize it until now." The final test. Daniel's mind raced as he tried to process the genie's words. His father's experiment, the Genie protocol, had been shut down decades ago. Victor Hayes was dead. How could this still be happening? "What do you want from me?" Daniel demanded, his voice rising. "I've already made the wishes. I've already destroyed everything. What more do you want?" The genie's laughter was low and menacing. "Oh, Daniel, the game isn't over yet. There's one more test, one final choice." Daniel's heart sank. "No," he whispered. "I'm done. I'm not playing your game anymore." "You don't have a choice," the genie said, his voice turning icy. "You never did." The line went dead and Daniel was left staring at the phone, his mind spinning. He didn't know what the final test would be, but he knew one thing for certain. The genie wasn't finished with him. Not yet. As Daniel sat alone in his apartment, the weight of his father's legacy pressing down on him, the phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a call. It was a text. The message was simple, but it sent a chill down his spine. "One last choice, Daniel. Are you ready?" Daniel's hands trembled as he stared at the words. He didn't know what the choice would be, but he knew it would be the hardest one yet. And for the first time since this nightmare began, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: determination. If this was his father's game, then he would end it, no matter what it took. Chapter 8. The dramatic finale. The message glared back at Daniel from his phone's screen. "One last choice, Daniel. Are you ready?" His hands trembled as he gripped the phone, the weight of everything he had lost pressing down on him like a vice. Sophia's dreams were gone. Nathan's life was in ruins. And Emily no longer even remembered him. The three most important people in his life had been torn apart, and it was his fault. Or rather, it was the genie's fault. No, it was his father's fault. The lines blurred in his mind, guilt and anger twisting together in a knot he could no longer untangle. Daniel stood, pacing the room as his thoughts raced. The genie's game had pushed him to the brink, but he wasn't broken. Not yet. Somewhere deep in the recesses of his soul, a flicker of defiance remained. He wasn't done fighting, not for his loved ones, not for himself. If this was truly his father's legacy, then he would be the one to end it. The phone buzzed again, shaking him from his thoughts. Another message. Meet me where it all began. Daniel frowned, confusion mingling with dread. Where it all began. He thought back to what he had learned about his father, about the Genie protocol, and the shadowy group known as the Architects. The pieces began to fall into place. There was only one location that made sense. His father's old research facility, an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city that had been shuttered for decades. Daniel grabbed his coat and keys, his heart pounding as he headed for the door. He didn't know what awaited him at the facility, but one thing was certain. He would face it head on. The drive to the facility was cold and silent, the city fading into the rearview mirror as Daniel made his way toward the desolate outskirts. The road wound through stretches of empty fields and abandoned industrial sites, the glow of streetlights giving way to darkness. By the time he reached the facility, the night had deepened and the air was thick with an unnatural stillness. The building loomed before him, its edges jagged and crumbling with age. Broken windows stared out like empty eyes, and the once pristine walls were streaked with graffiti and decay. But despite its derelict state, Daniel felt an undeniable pull toward the structure, as though the answers he sought were waiting for him inside. He stepped out of the car, his breath visible in the cold night air, and approached the main entrance. The door creaked as he pushed it open, the sound echoing through the cavernous interior. The faint smell of mildew and rust filled his nostrils, and his footsteps echoed eerily as he made his way down the darkened corridor. "Welcome, Daniel." The voice stopped him in his tracks. It was the Genie, calm, smooth, and maddeningly familiar. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, as though the building itself were speaking to him. "Where are you?" Daniel called out, his voice trembling with equal parts fear and anger. "Show yourself." "Patience," the Genie replied, his tone laced with amusement. "You've come this far. A little further won't hurt." A faint light flickered at the end of the corridor, and Daniel followed it, his heart pounding with every step. The hallway opened into a large room, its walls lined with monitors and equipment that looked as though it hadn't been touched in years. In the center of the room stood a single chair, illuminated by a harsh overhead light, and beside the chair was a man, the face behind the Genie. The man was tall and impeccably dressed, his suit pristine despite the dilapidated surroundings. His face was sharp and angular, his hair slicked back, and his eyes gleamed with an unsettling intelligence. But what struck Daniel most was the familiarity of the man's features. There was something about him, a shadow of someone Daniel had seen before. "Ah, Daniel," the man said, spreading his arms in a mockery of welcome. "It's good to finally meet you in person." "Who are you?" Daniel demanded, his voice shaking. "Are you the Genie?" The man smiled, a cold, calculated expression that sent a chill down Daniel's spine. "You could say that, but my name is Alexander. I was your father's partner, his collaborator." Daniel's stomach turned. "You worked with my father on the Genie protocol?" Alexander nodded. "Victor was a visionary, though I doubt you see him that way. He believed in the power of destruction, in the idea that only by tearing someone apart could they be rebuilt into something greater. And you, Daniel, were his crowning achievement." "What are you talking about?" Daniel demanded, his fists clenching at his sides. Alexander's smile widened. "You were the ultimate test subject. Your father designed this game for you, Daniel. Every choice you've made, every life you've destroyed, it's all been part of his grand experiment. He wanted to see how far you could be pushed, how much you could endure before you broke." Daniel's blood ran cold. "You're lying. My father would never do this." "Wouldn't he?" Alexander countered, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "You've seen his journals. You know what he was capable of. This was his life's work, Daniel. And now it's yours." The final choice. Daniel's mind raced as he tried to process Alexander's words. His father had done this to him. His own father had turned his life into a twisted game, a series of impossible choices designed to push him to the brink. And now Alexander was here to finish what Victor had started. "What do you want from me?" Daniel asked, his voice trembling. Alexander gestured to the chair in the center of the room. One final choice. Sit down, and we'll begin. Daniel hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to run, but he knew there was no escaping this. Not now. Slowly, he stepped forward and lowered himself into the chair. The cold metal bit into his skin, and straps automatically tightened around his wrists and ankles, holding him in place. Alexander stepped closer, his expression unreadable. Here's how this works, Daniel. You can undo everything, the wishes, the damage, all of it. You can give Sophia her dreams back, pull Nathan out of his spiral, and restore Emily's memories. But there's a how. What cost? Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Alexander's smile returned, colder than ever. You. If you choose to undo the wishes, you'll take their place. You'll lose everything, your freedom, your identity, your memories. You'll become the next subject in the Genie protocol, a blank slate for us to work with. Or you can walk away, keep your life, your memories, and let them suffer. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. The choice was unbearable. He could save them, but at the cost of himself. Or he could keep his life, but live with the knowledge that he had destroyed theirs. Take your time, Alexander said, stepping back. I'll be here when you're ready. Daniel's decision. Daniel closed his eyes, his mind racing. He thought of Sophia, her vibrant spirit crushed under the weight of practicality. He thought of Nathan, broken and isolated, drowning in the emptiness of wealth. And he thought of Emily, the love they had shared erased from her mind. They didn't deserve this. None of them did. I've made my decision, he said, his voice steady. Alexander raised an eyebrow. Oh, and what will it be? Daniel took a deep breath, his hands clenching into fists. Undo the wishes. Give them their lives back. Alexander's smile faltered for the first time, replaced by something that almost resembled respect. Very well, he said, as you wish. The room dissolved into darkness, and Daniel felt a sharp, blinding pain shoot through his mind. His memories began to unravel, slipping away like grains of sand through his fingers. He thought of Sophia, Nathan, and Emily one last time, their faces blurring as the world around him faded into nothingness. And then there was silence. Epilogue. Sophia sat at her desk, a manuscript open in front of her. The words flowed effortlessly, her passion reignited. Nathan stood on the basketball court, laughing with friends as the weight of his struggles lifted. And Emily sat in her apartment, staring at an old photo of her and Daniel, tears streaming down her face as the memories came flooding back. As for Daniel, he was gone. His sacrifice had restored their lives, but at the cost of his own. Somewhere in the depths of the Genie protocol, a new subject had been born, a blank slate, a man with no name, no past, and no future. But the game was far from over.